Masechet Megilah Daf Lamed Aleph. We begin with the Mishnah, that lists all the Torah readings for the various holidays and special days of the year, beginning with Pesach, the first major holiday. But Pesach Korin beParashat Moadot Shel Torat Kohanim. And the Mishnah teaches that on Pesach, the Mishnah, of course, is only one day of Pesach. This is not talking about Tuya Shnei Shel Galuyot. And it says on Pesach, we read from the section about the holidays in Torat Kohanim. What the Torat Kohanim is how the Mishnah refers to Sefer Vayikra. This is in chapter 22, 23, Parashat Emor. We, however, do not do this. We actually read from Parashat Bo on the first day of Pesach. And what we're going to see is that while many of the statements that the Mishnah says we still follow, many of them have changed since. In fact, even from the time of the Mishnah to the time of Gemara, there were changes, and the Gemara is going to quote a lot of things that are different from the Mishnah. The practice that we have nowadays was pretty much settled by the time of the Geonim, after the Gemara. But it's really fascinating to see the Torah readings that were once upon done and how they've changed over time in different communities. Okay, Ba'aseret Shiv'a Shavuot. On Shavuot, we read the section of Devarim that talk about the holidays, and specifically where it says there you should count 7 weeks. Rosh Hashanah b'chodesh Shvi'i be'echad lachodesh. On Rosh Hashanah, we go back to Vayikra Parashat Emor, and we read there where it talks about the 7th month on the first day of the month. That's Tishrei, which is Rosh Hashanah. We actually don't do this. We read Hashem Pakad et Sarah, as the Gemara will note. B'Yom Kippurim Acharemot. Okay, we do read Acharemot, all of the service of Yom Kippur mentioned in Vayikra Tet Vav. Tet Zayin, B'Yom Tov Harishon Shel Chag Korin beParashat Moadot Shebetorat Kohanim. On the first day of Sukkot, we read the section of the holidays again back in Parashat Emor. Ubeshar Kol Yemot Hag beKorbanot Hag. And on the other days of Sukkot, every day of Sukkot, all Chol HaMoed, we read from the Torah, and so we will read there the korbanot that we bring on Sukkot, which change every day. The parim specifically go from 13 down to 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7. So each day we read the appropriate section from Parashat Pinchas, where all the korbanot musafin are found. All right, so those are the major holidays of the year. And then we go to the minor holidays, B'Chanukah, B'Nesi'im. On Chanukah, we read the tribute that was given by the various Nesi'im of each Shevet upon the Chanukah, the dedication of the Mishkan, which makes sense. On Chanukah, we're rededicating the Bet HaMikdash. And so this is a parallel. But Purim Vayavo Amalek, on Purim itself, we read about the story of Amalek coming and fighting with Israel when they came out of Egypt because of the connection between Haman and Agag. Berasheh Chodashim, Uberasheh Chodshechem. On Rosh Chodesh, read the part in Pinchas about the Korban Musaf of Rosh Chodesh. B'Ma'amadot, B'Maaseh Bereshit, on those special days when a selection of non-Kohanim are chosen to represent all of Bnei Israel in Jerusalem or anywhere they live, and they take out Sefer Torah and read Torah every day of the week. They read Bereshit Perek Aleph. Ubetaniyot, on public fast days, Berachot uklalot. We don't do this. We read Vaychal Moshe from Kitisa. But in the times of the Mishnah, they would read the blessings and curses from the end of Vayikra, because that prompts people to make teshuvah by realizing all the calamities that should happen should we not follow the laws. En mafsikin b'kilalot ela echad koret kulan. And now they mentioned kilalot. Another halacha is that we should not split up the section of curses between more than one aliyah. Rather, one oleh reads all of them. I think Gemara will explain why, even though it's a long aliyah. that usually you might split, but in this case you don't. Basheni ubachamishi b'Shabbat v'mincha korin kesidran ve'en olin lahen minha cheshbon. On Monday and Thursday and Shabbat mincha, we read from the regular Parashat HaShavua, whatever it is, and those readings don't add up in the count of the how much we're getting through Parashat HaShavua. In other words, on Monday, on Shabbat afternoon, we're going to start reading, let's say, right, in this week, we started reading the beginning of Bishalach. And then Monday, we again go back to the beginning of Bishalach. On Thursday, back to the beginning of Bishalach. We don't continue from where we left off from on Monday and then continue reading on Thursday. And we don't continue from where we left off on Thursday and then start reading there on Shabbat. If we did that, we would finish with 3 aliyot during the week and have the parasha would be almost half as long. But we don't do that. Rather, on Shabbat, we go all the way back to the beginning and we read the entire parasha. The reason for that is that not only today, but even the times of the Mishnah, not so many people came to Bet Knesset during the week. People were and are busy, but most people came on Shabbat. And so therefore, they would not have heard it on Monday and Thursday. And so we read the whole thing every Shabbat. Shene Emad, and now this pasuk is going back on what happened before, the special readings for each holiday. We don't just read regular Parashat HaShavua on a holiday because Vaydaber Moshe et Modeh Adonai el Bnei Israel Misvatan Shu Korin Kol Echad Ve'echad Bizmano. Moshe spoke about the holidays to Bnei Israel. In other words, just like Moshe taught about the holidays on each appropriate day, so too we should read that section of each day at when appropriate. Okay, very good. So that's the Mishnah, and now we quote a Baraita that will expand on the various readings of the all year round. Just like the Mishnah said, on Pesach we read from Vayikra Parashat Emor. Now the Braita is going to add haftarot also, and we read from the Pesach that was celebrated in the first generation that with Yehoshua and in Gilgal. Nowadays, so this is the Gemara adding, right? You can see that it switches from Hebrew to Aramaic, Vayidana. So this is not part of the Braita, but rather in the Talmud Bavli, because they were in exile and they're celebrating 2 days of Yom Tov. So it's now that we have 2 days, we're going to read on the first day that same Haftarah, and the second day the Korban Pesach that was celebrated by Yoshia in the Sefer Melachim Bet. On the other days of Pesach, we read all different places. I mean, it talks about Pesach in lots of places throughout Chumash. So every day we find a different one. Maihi, and what do we read? Amara Papa Mapu Siman. A mnemonic to remember the readings of each of the days of Chol HaMoed is Mapu. This is not a political party in the Israeli Knesset, but rather the Mem stands for Mishechu Chulachem, from Shemot 12. The Aleph stands for Im Kesef Tavet Ami. Continuation there talks about Pesach. The Pes stands for Pesol Lecha from Kitisa, and the Vav stands for Vaydaber, numbers 9, which is about Pesach Sheni. Okay, very good. And now that would be cover 4 days of Chol HaMoed. There's going to be a Shabbat usually in between as well. Now Yom Tov Acharon Shel Pesach Korin Vayhi Beshalach. There's a typo in this edition in the Nikud. They say Bishloach, but it's actually Beshalach, which is a nice Parashat HaShavua coincidence. It also draws your attention to the fact that we don't read by Bishloach because that would be Binyan Kal, and that would mean like to send, like when you want to send a messenger. But Bishalach is PL. When Paro sent, he kicked out Bnei Israel. And so that makes a big difference. Okay, so on the last day of Pesach, that's when we commemorate the final leaving of out of Egypt and the splitting of the sea. So that's where we read Bishalach Maftirin Vaydaber David, and since we read a Shirah And in the Torah, we read Shirat David in the Haftarah. Ulmachar kol b'bechor umaftirin od hayom. And in Galut, when you have an extra day at the end of Pesach, we read Kol HaBechor from Devarim 15, and the Haftarah is about from Yeshaya 10, about the downfall of Sancheriv, a parallel to the downfall of Paro. Amar Abaye, Vaidanehu galma lemikre meshoch Torah kadesh bechaspa pesol bemidbera shelach buchra. Okay, Abaye says, and nowadays this is our custom, and this is in fact the custom that we do, and that is on the first day of Pesach, the first day of Yom Tov. We read Meshoch, right? Mishechu chulachem from Parashat Bo, and then we read Torah. Torah with an aleph means shor. A taf in Aramaic is often parallel to a shin in Hebrew, and the aleph at the end of a word in Aramaic just means like ha shor. So that's from shor or chesed oez from Vayikra 22, and then on the next day, which would be the first day of Chol HaMoed, we read Kadesh li kol bechor from Parashat Bo, and then Bekaspa im kesef talvet ami from Shemot. Pesol is in Parashat Kitisa, Pesol lecha, and then Bemidbera. Then that's where we read Numbers 9, was about Pesach Sheni, and then on the seventh day we read Parashat Shelach, Beshalach. And then finally, the last day of Pesach, when there is an extra day in Galut, we read Bukhra, which is to Devarim 15. Okay, very good. Now back to the Baraita. Ba'aseret. On Shavuot, we read Shiva Shavuot. Umaftirin, as the Mishnah said, Umaftirin b'Habakuk. We read the Habakkuk mentions the giving of Torah in chapter 2. Others say that no, we read Shemot chapter 19 and 20. That is what we do on the first day of Shavuot, because that's commemorating Matan Torah. So we read about the entire setting of Matan Torah in 19, and then the 10 Commandments in chapter 20. And we have the Haftarah in Yechezkel chapter 1. Because that is also a great theophany, a great experience of Hashem, seeing Hashem, just like Bnei Israel had at Har Sinai, so too Yechezkel has. And nowadays that we have 2 days, we do so. We follow both opinions, and we do so in reverse. In other words, on the first day we read from Shemot 19, and on the second day we read what the Mishnah had Shiva Shavuot. So we end up doing both. Right over here it was a Tanakama Nacherim. It was 2 different opinions about what to do on the first day. But since we have 2 days of Yom Tov of Shavuot, so we can do both. Rosh Hashanah b'chodesh HaShevi'i. On Rosh Hashanah we're going to read from b'chodesh Shevi'i in Numbers 29, Parashat Pinchas. Oh, Maftirin haben yakir li Ephraim, and in the Haftarah we read from Yirmiyah, which mentions Zachodes Kerenu. I will remember Bnei Israel is one of the Pesukim that we also read in Zichronot in the Musaf. And others say that they were talking about when there's 1 day of Rosh Hashanah, which biblically is only 1 day, then we read Hashem remembered Sarah. The reason for this is because, as Midrash says, when did Hashem remember Sarah? In other words, when did Sarah become pregnant? I was on Rosh Hashanah, just like other imahot, and Yosef got out of jail. In other words, all kinds of happy things, especially things that people are hoping for and expecting and waiting for a long time. So Rosh Hashanah, because it's a new beginning, right? And so we start with new berachas. So therefore, the Midrash associates all these happy events with Rosh Hashanah, and that's why the rabbis chose Vashem Pakad et Sarah according to this Yesh Omrim. And since we talked about Sarah becoming conceiving, so too Chana, we read about her conception, parallel stories. Okay, Vaidana, Tika Tereyome. Nowadays we have 2 days of Rosh Hashanah, even in Israel. So Yomak Kama Ki Yesh Omrim. The first day we'll read Vashem Pakad. That's exactly what we do. And on the second day, we read Akedat Yitzchak. And the Haftarah will be a Ben Yakir, which was the first opinion here. And so we end up doing both of the haftarot in this braita, Tanakama and Yoshomrim, although the B'chodesh Shevi'i will end up reading as the maftir. Interestingly, the entire Mishnah and this entire braita does not mention the custom that we have that on basically every holiday we read something about the holiday, and then the only the maftir is from Parashat Pinchas about the korbanot. But the Mishnah and the Braita don't have that custom. So that custom may have begun later in time of the Geonim. Okay, so we do cover that reading. I think this is absolutely fascinating because most people think, that the main reading for Rosh Hashanah is Akedat Yitzchak, right? That's no greater thing. And remember the shofar and all that, and the Hashem have rachamim, like Avraham quashed his rachamim for his son, and remember his sacrifice and all that. And then why do we read the chapter before? I don't know, maybe just because we're going to read Akedat Yitzchak in chapter 22. So, all right, well, the day before we'll read chapter 21. It seems like a side point. But in fact, when you see this Gemara, I see it's the exact opposite. The main reading for Rosh Hashanah is in fact chapter 21, Hashem remembering and Sarah, and then she conceiving. And then, we have another day. You know what? We'll keep reading into 22, which is also a good reading, Akedat Yitzchak. But the main one is actually the one on the first day. Okay, so you learn all kinds of beautiful things when you see the origin of where our customs came from. Okay, B'Yom Kippurim Korina Haremot. That's exactly what we do. Vayikra 16, all of the details of the Avodah. Maftirin Kicho Amar Ram V'Nisa. And we read the Haftarah from Yeshaya, where it talks about, is this the kind of fast I want when you're swaying like a bulrush, right? And so while we're fasting, we always have to read Yeshaya saying, what's the whole point of fasting? That's an important haftarah. We read about all the prohibited laws of arayot. These are very important laws, and on Yom Kippur we want to remind everybody of them. And the famous haftarah of Yonah, of course. Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Okay, since we mentioned the haftarah of Yom Kippur here, we're going to go, we interrupt the Braita again with a statement by Rabbi Yochanan, a beautiful and famous one, that says, anytime you see Hashem's greatness, you will also find Hashem's humility. In other words, they go hand in hand. It's not always so for human beings. For human beings, when you see someone great, a great famous actor or famous politician or whatever, usually they're like high above, and it's hard for them to relate to the common person. Whereas Hashem's greatness is in fact the opposite. His greatness manifests not in Hashem being aloof and transcendent and not dealing with little human beings, but rather exactly the opposite. We find Hashem's greatness in his humility to come and help the poor, the widow, the orphan, and so on, and anyone who is in need of help. And we find this proven in Tanakh. It's said many times in Torah, Nevi'im, and Ketuvim. Here's where we find it. Katuv b'Torah ki Adonai Elohechem hu Elohei Elohim v'Adonai ha'Adonim. Pasuk in Devarim says Hashem is the greatest. He's the God of all gods, the master of all masters. And the very next pasuk, and yet, although he's the master of masters, he doesn't spend all day all the way up there, but rather he comes down and makes sure to do justice for the orphan and the widow. Right, that's what he cares about. Shanui Beketuvim is repeated in Nevi'im. Shem ben Nevi'im. Koamad Ram benisa shochen ad vekadosh. Okay, Yeshaya 57, right? This is the haftarah for Shabbat, for Yom Kippur morning. That's why we're bringing this whole thing in. And so Hashem is high and mighty and lives all the way up high in his holiness. And yet the very same pasuk says, vet dake ushval ruach, and yet Hashem will help those who are crushed and low in spirit. Right? Anyone who's in depression, who's having a hard time, Hashem, although He's so high, will help them out down here. Mishulash beketuvim udichtiv solu laroche barabot beyashemo. In Psalm 68, the psalm we say on Shavuot, it says we should extol Him, Hashem, who rides on the clouds. Uchtiv, so that's really high up. Uchtiv batre avi yatomim v'dayan almanot, and yet He's also the father of the fatherless and judge of the widows. I think we learn an important lesson for us as well, right? If you want to what do you call someone great? It's someone who's modest and humble and caring and giving and someone who loves chesed. Okay, beautiful teaching. By the way, this is found all over our tefillah. Right, being the first beracha of the Amidah. El Hagadol, Hagibor, Vanora, El Alyon. We're praying to the God who's transcendent and great, up all the way up high. El Alyon, Gomel Chasadim Tovim, Koneh Hakol, Vezocher Chasdei Avot. And yet He cares about us, remembers us, and remembers the covenant that He made with our forefathers, and so on. Okay, and brings redemption. So this paradox is everywhere and is essential to understanding our relationship with Kadosh Baruch Hu. Excellent. Yom Tov Harishon Shel Chag, Korin b'Parashat Moadot shebetorat Kohanim. In the first day of Sukkot, we're going to read from Vayikra 22 and 23 in Parashat Emor, all the section of the holidays. Maftirin Hinei Yom Ba LaHashem, and we do the Haftarah from Zechariah 14. It talks about the great day that's going to be on Sukkot when all the nations of the world are expected to come up to Yerushalayim, and that is what we do. Although today we have 2 days. So Lemachad Mikra Hachinami Karin, and we read the same section of Torah on the second day. We do that till today. And after we read from Sefer Melachim, where the people come to King Shlomo on Sukkot and they celebrate the dedication of the first Bet Hamikdash. Ushar Kol Yemot HaChag, and the rest of the days of Sukkot. We read each one the day, the special korbanot of each day, the Parim 13, 12, 11, and so on, from Parashat Pinchas. Yom Tov Acharon Korin Kol HaBechor. On the last day, Kol HaBechor from Devarim, Misvot V'chukim U'Bechor. But we also read a little bit before that, where it talks about other commandments, like aser ta'aser. Over there, you should give a ma'aser, you should help the poor. These are all important laws. So we start off from 1422, even though the holidays themselves don't start till chapter 15. And then we read, it's actually a continuation of what we started over here, that from Melachim chapter 8. The end of that chapter is that after Shlomo made an end to his prayer and the celebration upon the dedication of the Bet HaMikdash, then he sent everybody home on the 8th day. So he's curious that on Shemini Aseret, which is the 8th day celebration, we read about Shlomo sending people home on the 8th day. All right, we'll have to, that's a separate class. Lemachad korin vezot haberacha. On the next day, when you have a 9th day of Sukkot, right, the Yom Tov Sheni for Shemini Aseret, we read vezot haberacha umaftirin vayamod Shlomo. So on that day, we read vezot haberacha. Now that day is Simchat Torah for us for those outside of the land of Israel, and so we do read vezot haberacha. I'm not sure here when the Talmud says vezot haberacha, if they mean this to be also Simchat Torah, because there were different customs about when to finish the Torah. So this could be, although in Israel nowadays it's on the 8th day that they finish Simchat Torah. Shemini Aseret and Simchat Torah are the same day, and so they read vezot haberacha and not Kol HaBechor on Simchat Torah itself. So we have to remember that in Israel, back in the time of the Talmud, they used a triennial cycle, and so they didn't have Simchat Torah. So that's why they only read Kol HaBechor. Okay, so this is a little different than what we do today. And the haftarah would be Vaya'amod Shlomo, which is actually the Pesukim right between the previous two haftarot that we mentioned. And we don't do that today because for us it's Simchat Torah. Okay, Amar Rav Huna Amar Rav, Shabbat shechal liyot becholo shel moed, ben bepesach, ben besukot. When you have Shabbat chol moed, there are two of them, possibly two of them during the year. So Pesach or Sukkot, Mikra Karenan Re'ata. We read Re'ata from Parashat Ki Tisa. That's what we do. And after that, Pesach Hatzamot Ha'yiveshot, Ubasukot Beyom Bo Gog. On Pesach, the Haftarah will be about the dry bones from Yechezkel, and on Sukkot, it's the great war that's going to happen with Gog. Both of these are associated with a final Geulah, and this has to do with the idea that a final Geulah will happen on the major holidays, on Pesach and on Sukkot. B'Chanukah, b'Nesiim, on the 8 days of Chanukah, we read about the presents, the gifts that the Nesiim gave upon dedicating the Mishkan, and now we're rededicating the Bet HaMikdash. Umaftirin benerot Zechariah. On Shabbat of Chanukah, we read about the menorah in Zechariah chapter 2. And sometimes there are two Shabbatot during Chanukah, right? One at the beginning, one at the end. Kamaita benot Zechariah, the first Shabbat we'll read that, but Raita benerot Shlomo, and the second one we'll read about the menorahs that Shlomo built and placed in the first Bet HaMikdash, where he had not one but 10 menorahs. Bepurim vayabo Amalek. Purim, as Mishnah said, read vayabo Amalek. But Asher Chodashim b'Asher Chodesh Shechem. On Rosh Chodesh, read about the Korbanot. In Pinchas, Rosh Chodesh shechal liyot b'Shabbat maftirin v'haya mideh Chodesh b'Chodsho. If any time Rosh Chodesh happens to be, most of the time when Rosh Chodesh happens to be on Shabbat, we say haftarah about Rosh Chodesh itself. From Yeshaya 66, and Chaliyot Bechad B'Shabbat, whenever Rosh Chodesh is on Sunday, Metmol Maftirin Yuvayom Elo Yonatan Machar Chodesh. So we read the story in Shemuel about when Yonatan says tomorrow is Rosh Chodesh, because that's appropriate, and so we'll skip the regular haftarah on those occasions. Amar Rav Huna, Rosh Chodesh Av Shechaliyot B'Shabbat. When Rosh Chodesh Av is also Shabbat, Maftirin Chodshechem Moadechem Sanaa Nafshi Hayu Alai La Torah. We read Yeshaya chapter 1, which is a harsh chapter, and that's appropriate as we enter into Av. Nowadays, we say this is Shabbat Chazon, the Shabbat before Tisha B'Av, is when we read this. So we do something very similar to what it says here. Mai hayu alai letorach, when it says that your holidays and your Rosh Chodesh are for me like a burden. What does that mean? Hashem says that they're a burden. Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu lo dayan lahem lisel shechotin lefanai ela shematrichin oti leda ezo gezerah kasha avi alehem. Hashem says, you know what? It's a burden because not only does Israel sin before me, and that's bad enough, now I have to go bother and think about what kind of punishment do I have to give them, right? This is lehavdil, like when I have a student who misses a midterm or fails a final, right? Not only is it bad enough that I have, the student that's not doing well, but now I have to go and think about when I'm going to do a makeup, I have to write a new test, and right, it's even more work. And so that's the Torah that's involved that Yeshaya is talking about. B'Tish'a B'Av Gufeh Mai Maftirinan. We read a haftarah Tisha B'Av itself. What haftarah? Amarav Echa Heta Lezona. We read Echa. No, actually, we don't do this. We read this as the haftarah on Shabbat Chazon, the Shabbat beforehand. We have a different haftarah, which is coming up here. Mikra Mai. What reading do we have on Tisha B'Av? Tanya, Acharim Omrim, Vim lo tishme'u li. So there's different opinions. The reading on Tisha B'Av, some say, is from Vayikra 26, which is all the curses, right? Terrible, terrible section, appropriate for Tisha B'Av. We don't do that. Rabbi Natan Bar Yosef omer, Ad ana yinasuni ha'am hazeh, ve'yesh omerim ad matay la'dad ha'azot. Both of these opinions are from Bemidbar 14, which is about the Medaglim, the spies. And Hashem says, right, how long will this people provoke me? How long can I bear? And Hashem calls Bnei Israel this evil congregation. So these are also two terrible pisukim to read, appropriate for Tisha B'Av. But we don't read those either. Amar Abaye Haidana, Nehuk Alma Lemikre Ki Tolid Banim, Umaftirin Asof Asifem. Nowadays, the custom is to read Ki Tolid Banim in Devarim. And although it's true, the beginning of Ki Tolid Banim, Bnei Banim, V'noshantem Ba'aretz, and when you come into land and you sin, then, there's going to be bad things. But then after just a few pisukim, it says, Ubikashtem Misham, when you go into exile, that you will seek out Hashem and Hashem will remember you and Hashem will bring you back. And so instead of reading these three possibilities of like the worst pisukim you could find, the most devastating in the Torah, instead we read one that starts off bad but ends with hope. And so this is really important about the way that we think about Tisha B'Av and the way we think about tragedy. And same with the Haftarah, we don't read Echai Lezona, but rather Asof Asifem, I'm going to, and this, if you look in there in Yirmiyah 8, also, it's negative, but it ends with a positive note. It ends with an uplifting sense of hope for the future. Okay, so this is a really, really very interesting to see the historical development of the readings for Tisha B'Av. Okay, it's good to be sad, but sometimes you can't be only sad. You have to have some hope for the future too. Okay, with the non-priestly groups who represent Bnei Israel would read Genesis chapter 1. What's the source? The reason is because if not for these watches, for the people that represented Bnei Israel in offering the Korban Tamid and the communal offerings, right? These are the regular reminders of the Berit that we have with Hashem. And if not for that, if lo beriti, if not for my covenant, day and night, meaning every single day or every Korban Tamid, then Hashem would not have created the world. Why bother if people aren't going to follow the laws of the covenant? And therefore, so every day we read from Bereshit Perek Aleph to remind ourselves that the whole purpose of creation is in fact adhering to the Berit. Uchti vayomad Adonai Elohim b'ma'eda ki irashenna. Further regarding this, Avraham says to Hashem, how do I know that I will inherit as you promised? Amar Avraham lifnei Kadosh Baruch Hu Ribono shel Olam, Shem achas v'shom Yisrael chotim lefanech v'ata oseh lehem kedor hamabul uchdor hapalaga. It's based on this. Since the whole world is the existence of the world is based on Bnei Israel keeping the berit. So Avraham, when he asks, how do I know that I will inherit? He wasn't asking a personal question. He wanted to know a larger question. He says, in the future, should Bnei Israel sin, are you going to then destroy the world like you did, Hashem, back in the time of the flood and in the generation of the dispersion, of this dispersion, right? Since you just said that the existence of the world depends on the Berit. Amar lo lav says, no, Hashem, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to have mercy and patience. Amar lefanav ribono shalom b'ma'eda. Prove it, Hashem. How do I know? Amar lo kechali egla meshuleshet. And that's the whole Berit ben Abetarim, right? Take these animals and split them, and Hashem guarantees that He won't destroy the world, even if Bnei Israel should deviate from the Berit. Amar lefanav ribono shalom tenach bizman shebet hamikdash kayam. Abraham says, okay, great. I know that this will be true when the Bet HaMikdash is around. Perhaps that's symbolized by the animals that he just cut, that those symbolize the korbanot that they will offer in the Bet HaMikdash. And that will guarantee that things will go as planned and they will keep up the world. But when the Bet HaMikdash is destroyed, then what are we going to do? What's going to be the guarantee? Amar lo, תיקנתי להם סדר קורבנות, כל זמן שקוראים להם בהן מעלה, אני עליהן, כאילו מקריבים לפני קורבן, מוחל אני על כל עוונותיהם. Hashem says, don't worry, I already made the order of korbanot, and you don't have to actually do them. All you have to do is read them like we do. And this relates to the readings before, right? Because on each of the holidays, we read about the korbanot of that day, and in the daily prayers, we read about the korbanot, the daily korbanot, or on Shabbat or Rosh Chodesh, about the Musafin. And so, as even if you just read them, then it will be like you gave it, and I will pardon all of Bnei Israel's sins. Right? The point is that Hashem doesn't actually eat the meat or drink the blood of the sacrifices. They're not made for him, but rather for us, right? As a symbol of our commitment. And as long as we have that commitment in mind, we can just recite it and don't actually have to do it. It's the thought that counts. Okay, back to the Mishnah that says on fast days, we read the blessings and curses in Vayikra, and you can't interrupt the curses. It has to be one aliyah. Why do you have to read all the curses in one aliyah? Because the pasuk says in Mishle, my son, do not despise Hashem's rebuke. See, if you split it up, then it's like, the first guy says, I had enough rebuke. All right, give it to someone else. Right, next guy, I had enough, give it to someone else. Right, no, we should love rebuke. Right, even though these are harsh statements, but it's not a curse in the sense that it's going to come upon anyone, but rather it's a warning right, and therefore it's a prompt to make teshuvah. Nowadays there are some places that nobody wants to get the aliyah for the klalot, right, and so they have to give it to the guy, the gabbai who gives out the aliyot. He gets it, so because no one else wants to give it. But truth is, right, you see, based on this, it's actually a great merit to get this aliyah. So it's a beautiful aliyah. It's nice and long, and right, it shows that we love to hear rebuke because we want to better ourselves. So it's actually a great merit. And that's why one person takes the whole thing. Another reason is because we should not say a blessing upon a calamity that's happening. I saw one comment, a beautiful commentary that explains this as, when Bnei Israel is suffering, where is Hashem? We saw a couple of days ago, right? Hashem is with us too. And so to bless Hashem and then talk about Hashem suffering is a paradox itself. So that's why, so this is a problem, right? So that's why we don't say, but that's why we don't stop in the middle. Because if you make an aliyah in the middle, then the person is going to say the closing Birkot Torah, and next aliyah is going to say the opening Birkot Torah, and you have blessings right in the middle of curses. It is not appropriate. So what should we do? Because in any case, the first guy who the one aliyah is still going to have say berachot before and after the curses. So then you're still saying a beracha about negative things. So we say Tana keshu matchil pasuk lifnehem. Oh, when you begin, you don't start exactly at the klalot but rather start a pasuk before. We actually start a few pasukim before because you can't just have one pasuk there, and we'll end after it gets a little better, so that we're including the good with the bad. Okay, this halacha that you have to read it in one aliyah is only true in the klalot in Sefer Vayikrat and in Bechukotai. Mishnah Torah is the way that Talmud refers to Sefer Devarim, right? Our words for each of the Chumashim are actually late, right? This is the original name for Vayikras Torat Kohanim, which is actually a translation of Leviticus. Right? Leviticus comes from Torat Kohanim, Levi, right? The Leviim, and Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy means second law. Right, Deutero is second, Nomos is law, is actually a translation of Mishneh Torah. So our English name Deuteronomy is actually closer to the original Hebrew name that was used by Chazal. Question?
I'm just curious. There was a whole big deal at one point about, the minim. Like if somebody only says, Hashem does good as opposed to Hashem does bad, it's dualism, right? So here it's like they're making a whole big deal about, no, you're supposed to, right? So what's the
Right. Yeah, I was just thinking that, right, about blessing Hashem for curses. You could say, bless Hashem for the good and for the bad. So that's true. I don't think this is contradicting it. The point here is simply that, to say a beracha, like, be in a happy mood, specifically when you read this and this brings you in the sad mood, So why not include a couple of more Pesukim? I think it relates to what we just said about Tisha B'Av. Also, the Tisha B'Av reading, we don't want to only read something negative, right? Anytime you have something negative, you still, even when you visit a mourner, you say, I hope happy occasions in the future. You should find nechama, right? You always want to include a little bit of hope into it. So I think that's the idea. But it's not that. Of course, and all things, the good and bad, all come from Hashem. Okay, yeah, good question. All right, so the fact that you have to say all the curses in one aliyah, that's only true regarding Vayikra, but not regarding the kilalot that are in Devarim. My ta'ama, why? Halalu b'shon rabim amurot u'Moshe mepi ha'gebura amaran, v'halalu b'shon yachid amurot u'Moshe mepi asma amaran. Very interesting answer. It says the ones in Vayikra are said in plural, and if you go look there, right? You plural, and the whole thing is the you is atem is in plural. So whereas the ones in Devarim says yakecha in singular, Hashem will smite you in particular. So the ones that are in plural are a lot more important, more powerful than the ones in Devarim that are in singular. That's one difference. A second difference is that the ones in Vayikra, Moshe said them from the mouth of Hashem, right? This is from Har Sinai. He received these and he told them to the people directly. Whereas the ones in Devarim, Moshe said on his own. So this is really interesting. What do you mean Hashem said on his own? Well, if you read Sefer Devarim, most of it, right, it's Moshe speaking in first person. Moshe saying, "Hi, I'm Moshe, right? I took you out. I did this. You did this, right?" He's telling the whole story, and it reads as Moshe's speech. Moshe sat and wrote it himself, and therefore the klalot also. Now, of course, has the status of chumash. Why? Because after Moshe said the speech, and this is explicated by Abarbanel and many others, after Moshe said the speech, Hashem said, that was a good speech, right? It's worthy of being included in the Chumash, right? And so therefore, yes, of course, it has the status of Torah once it's edited and completed and included in the Chumash. Nevertheless, since originally the ones in Vayikra were directly from Hashem and the other ones were directly from Moshe, and only later given the stamp of approval, so the ones in Devarim are of lesser strength and less harsh. And therefore, if you want to add aliyot, you may add aliyot to the klalot in Parashat Ki Tavo. All right, that's a very important principle for understanding really the whole Sefer Devarim. Okay, Levi bar buti hava kari veka megamgem kamed Ravuna barure. So this reader was reading the klalot and he was stammering because it was so scary that he couldn't get through them straight. And Amar lo akenafshach. Lo shanu ela kilalot shebetorat kohanim, aval b'shbetorah posek. And he said, listen, if it's difficult for you to go on, whatever you want, you can stop here. Since the rabbis only said that when you're reading Vayikra, one person has to read the whole thing. And remember then, the person getting the aliyah also read his own aliyah. So if it was in Vayikra, I would tell you, you got to keep going. We can't stop. But since you're reading Devarim, you know what? If you want to stop here and you're too overwhelmed, that's okay, and someone will take the next. We'll start wherever you left off with the next aliyah. Good. Tanya Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Omer. Ezra tiken le'seh shiyu korin kelalot shebatorat kohanim kodem aseret v'sheb'shnei Torah kodem Rosh Hashanah. Ezra enacted that Bnei Israel should read the curses in Vayikra right before Shavuot. Because Shavuot is when we're accepting the Torah upon ourselves, right? It's we're renewing the covenant, and an essential part of the Berit is knowing the fine print, knowing the consequences, right? It's the whole significance of when you enter into a contract or get married or any kind of deal is understanding the consequences of what happens if you don't keep up your side of the deal. And therefore, it's important to read the klalot before Matan Torah, before Shavuot, and we read the klalot in Devarim always before Rosh Hashanah. If you look at our calendar, that's exactly what we do. Our whole calendar is set up so that these parashiyot fall before Shavuot and before Rosh Hashanah. My Tama, what's the reason? So in explaining why we read Klalot before Rosh Hashanah, so that with the last thing we read during the year will be the Klalot, and then we say we conclude the year, and it's Klalot. And Rosh Hashanah we begin a new year, and now we can begin with Berachot. This is the source for the piyut that we begin Rosh Hashanah with Tichle Shana b'Kiluloteha, Tachel Shana b'Choteha. Right, the first half of it comes right from here. Good. So now we explained half of it. We explained why we read the Klalot in Devarim before Rosh Hashanah. But how come we read Klalot of Vayikra before Shavuot? Is Shavuot a new year? Because over here we only give one reason for both. But is Shavuot called a new year? Yes, it is. Ased nami Rosh Hashanah hi ditnan uba'aseret al perot ha'ilan. Since the Shavuot is a new year for fruits, right? For bikurim. So therefore, it is in a sense also a new year. And so that reason we want to end the previous year with endless klalot can apply, in fact, to both. All right, and we end with one final agadah. Tanya Rabbi Shimon ben El-Azar Omer, Im yomeru lecha zikenim setor, v'iladim bene setor ve'al tibne, mipnei shesetirat zikenim binyan, u'binyan ne'arim setira. So Rabbi Shimon ben El-Azar says, if the elders say, demolish something, and the children say, build, right? A lot of times the younger generation is full of energy and says, okay, build. What should you do? You should follow the elders. The elders have wisdom, and therefore demolish and don't build. Even though it seems like how is it productive to demolish? And the answer is yes, because the demolishing of the elders is in fact building. Sometimes you have to demolish before you could build. Sometimes you got to wipe away the bad before you could bring the good. And the building of the next generation is often itself demolishing. They're building something, but it's on shaky ground, and they don't know what they're doing, and it's going to end up in disaster. So always follow the wisdom of the elders. You want to know an example? Rechavam, the son of Shlomo, after he became the next king, and he had elders. He had different advisors, and the elders said, relax the taxes. You have to make everybody happy. And the younger said, no, be strong. You have to be, if you're right, you should be stronger than your father. Raise taxes and be harsh. And so he followed the younger, and it looks like he's building, right? He's giving more taxes, being stronger. But in the end, the people rebelled, and he lost most of the kingdom. And so you see that the elders were correct, even though they said diminish, but that diminishing would have been smart, would have been the right thing to do. Why is this agadah here? It doesn't seem to have to do with anything that came before. I think the idea is what we said about klalot, that right before a new year, we should read klalot. Klalot are about demolishing. Why should we read that? We want to think about happy things, right? Think about the secular New Year. They don't read any klalot. They just go and party and get drunk. And you think, right, that's the way you should celebrate, right? And the answer is no. You should listen to the elders. First, you have to demolish, right? First, we have to demolish any negative, any sins, make teshuvah, and only based on that, then we can bring in the new year with blessings and good things. Okay, wonderful wisdom, and we'll look forward to completing Masechet Megilah tomorrow. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen ve'amen.